Wednesday, May 15th, the day after Election Day in Maryland. We are joined by special guest, our favorite Republican governor of the great state of Maryland, Governor Bob Ehrlich. Welcome to the show, Governor, once more. And our hosts tonight are Mark Unkelfer and Jackie Saxton. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Dwight. Yes, it was an interesting night last night, highs and lows, and for the next 30-ish minutes, we're going to break down, I think, the biggest surprises of the night, because I think there were several. So, Gov, we'll start with you. What was your biggest surprise of the night?
Two, in both, not necessarily the wins, but the margins. Also, Brooks, 8 points, in excess of, I believe, 50,000 votes. Given the $61 million, $61 million doesn't buy for you what it used to, clearly. Wow.
It's a Biden inflation, you know. It's
right.
Senate seats
it actually bought like 4 million under the Biden regime. Anyway, not necessarily the winner, but the margin there. And then in the 6th district, Neil Parrott's margin over Cox surprised me to some extent. I thought that would be a closer race.
So going into more details on each of those, I expected Angela Alsobrooks to pull ahead in the end because of just the inflammatory remarks that David Chern has been making recently over the past several weeks. But I was for sure saying prior to yesterday it's going to be within 2 points. So that one stunned me.
I think that's probably right. Although now in retrospect, I'm hearing I didn't follow it that closely, basically just through the news, but I'm told she worked Baltimore County very effectively. Very effective. A lot of African-American votes in Baltimore County as well in Democratic primary, and she did a great job at it.
So very briefly, without staying on the topic for too long, how do you think that strategy is going to translate in the general? Because I think that might be Hogan's biggest challenge. They can't really use the Trump stink on Hogan because everyone knows that they do not like each other. But let's make history and elect the first Black female senator from the state of Maryland. How does he overcome that?
I don't know. I think, quite frankly, the bigger challenge is simply Democratic turnout in the presidential election year. That's what you're fighting, and you both know that. It's plus 3, plus 5, plus 7. It's just quite frankly, it's a Democratic state. It's a blue state. Presidential year, more Democrats show up.
Yeah.
So that's his problem. Now, Larry has shown his ability to attract Democratic votes. So to me, that's the number one challenge for him.
In some respects, isn't it the hunger of, again, his message has been to have a centrist senator, to break out this idea that everything's either red or blue, but to have a balance. And it's a challenge because, as we've talked about, this is a very polarized electorate. And so that's the challenge is really that path of finding people who want to have that balance.
But Mark, that's basically a different way of saying what I said. You know, I mean, this is an election that's coming down to concrete issues, not in the middle. This is the border. You know, this is inflation. This is the cost of living. This is Iran. I mean, these are clear. There's a clear philosophical divide in the country. So we'll see. It's going to be an interesting race, fun race, top national race as well.
Well, and sticking on that primary for a second, in terms of surprising margins, Robin Ficker got 30% of the vote. Yeah. And to me, that was a message to Larry Hogan to say, hey, listen, the conservatives still don't like you. And you can't guarantee that those people are going to come home to the party and necessarily hold their nose and vote for him. They might just leave it blank. So I think
he obviously
neglect them.
Not only your point's well taken, there's another 10% that didn't vote for Hogan or Ficker, voted for someone else.
Yeah.
So he has to obviously have those baseline votes, has to, and that's Governor Hogan's challenge going forward.
Yeah, and then I don't know if you listened to his remarks last night, but I would say they were very much speaking more to the independent and Democrat crowd, but I don't think that there was a lot there to encourage conservative voters to come back to him.
Well, there's a tightrope there, which is that if you communicate the message to Republican voters that it's a vote his election would be a vote for a Republican majority.
Yeah.
That cuts against him with many of the same voters or the other voters that he's trying to reach in Maryland, independents and soft Democrats who he's trying to appeal as, again, a more centrist senator who calls them like he sees them. And so it's as we've talked about before, it's a very difficult needle to thread.
Yeah, he'll have to rely on his boots on the ground people who are knocking Republican doors to relay that message.
Yep, no doubt.
So let's move on to congressional. Obviously, District 6 being the most closely watched of the 8 seats that we have. So that was another surprising margin in the primary.
Yeah, Neil's run a number of times. Neil Parrott, he's a good candidate. He was always running, ironically, we're always running against Trone money, which it appears, as we said earlier, didn't buy as much as it used to. But now it's an open seat. And we have a good candidate, and it's a national race. And that national Democratic turnout in an election year, I would submit to both of you, is less pronounced in that district. In other words, more moderates and more conservatives in that district. I don't know whether I guess it's a D plus district, but it's a small number.
D plus 1, 2.
It's a 1 plus 2 or 3. Yeah. It's a single digits and low single digits. So the fact that it's a presidential election year will have less impact in that district. Secondly, Trone not on the ballot and his money not on the ballot helps. And obviously, Parrott has a lot of name recognition from running a couple. So I know for a fact this is a national race, national focus. Both national parties will play here. They'll spend here. And again, Maryland will be in the national spotlight again, not just for the Senate race, but also this congressional seat as well.
And the rumor mill that I've heard is that the Democrats plan to put all their money into Angela Alsobrooks' race and leave the congressional seats to fend for themselves. I'm
not buying that for 1 second. DCCC is going to pump plenty of money in that seat. I'm not buying that for 1 second.
This has all the characteristics of one of those swing races that will decide who is the speaker. And the DCCC's mandate is to make sure they have that majority. So they will be very focused on that.
I also think, Mark, that the real smart people, allegedly the real smart people in D.C., for a while have been saying that odds are pretty good Republicans are going to get the Senate.
Yes.
But the House is very much up for grabs. So you're talking about a very thin margin in the House, and that seat is truly a swing seat.
It's going to be really interesting.
One of the challenges that we've always had as the numbers is while in Western Maryland a Republican candidate can and has racked up considerable numbers. Up to, I think some counties you get into the 80s, right? I mean, there's not a lot up that you can do. Obviously, turnout could be a difference. The challenge has been in Montgomery County that district sweeps into some pretty Democratic areas, like I think Germantown and I believe, as I recall, Montgomery Village, and that's been a challenge to be able to crack. I will say some of the candidates who lost in the Republican primary really tried to address that early on, maybe a little too soon by announcing in Germantown and highlighting their roots there. But for Neil, who's run before, doing a better job of cracking those voters in Montgomery County will be a real challenge.
Well, it's twofold. And again, it's much like what we just talked about with Larry. And I think this will be a strength of his, but he has to maximize every last red vote. Right. I mean, the flip side of that is equally true, as you point out. You have to get centrist Democrats, the ones that are still out there. And by the way, the ones that are still out there are pretty much located in that district.
Yeah.
Now, I know Montgomery County obviously has strong left leanings, but there's a bunch of gettable Democrats in that district. And I think Neil's a good candidate.
And Neil also has this interesting, again, he's got two very different types of coattails to ride when you have Trump and Hogan on the ticket at the same time. So, I mean, I think it would be in Neil's best interest to side more with the Hogan people. I think he'll be able to count reliably on the Western Maryland conservative vote. But it's that those Democrats in Montgomery County who would be willing to vote for Hogan, that if he can align himself closely enough with Hogan and his record that he might be able to actually pull this off.
Good point.
It actually, his primary campaign, there was a substantial amount of messaging that really tried to focus it to the extent that Neil's ever negative, and that's something that's just not a bone in his body that goes in that direction. But did call out Dan Cox for being anti, for wanting to impeach Larry and so forth. And so I think he did see that connecting himself with Hogan's candidacy was an appropriate way to go forward.
But at the same time, even though he's a great guy, nice guy, family guy, we love him. This is a high stakes race, and he's gonna. The good thing here is, some of these issues are so clear cut. And they may be right-wing positions, but my Lord, we should have a border.
Yeah.
And maybe we should develop some of our own energy resources since we have so much. And maybe we should stop placating Iran. I mean, these are not really extreme right-wing positions, but and hopefully we'll attract moderate Democratic votes. My Lord, I hope, I pray.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it really is going to come down to, we still have several months to go before November, but what is the state of the economy? Is it going to be so bad around November that people are just cannot in good conscience continue to vote Democrat?
Well, the thing we know is inflation, prices aren't going to be cut. They're not going down. Whether inflation moderates or not, we'll find out, but quite frankly, the damage is already done. That's the problem. I found this interesting today. Everybody focusing on the debates and the commentators doing their thing. You can't debate yourself out of working people losing real wages. You can't debate yourself out of the fact you helped set the world on fire by placating Iran. You can't debate yourself out of 10 million migrants showing up at the border because you invited them.
Yep.
And the fentanyl and everything that we know. So debates can be important. I suspect they're going to be less important this time. The hay's in the barn with regard to both records, both the Trump administration and the Biden administration. And there's very little Joe Biden can do to undo the damage he's done to this country.
Well, and it's fascinating. Two things. One, that psychological idea of, people tend to look back on the past fondly. So people are starting to remember more the good days under Trump and less about the negatives, whereas the errors under Biden's administration are more recent. And then also the recent polling that's coming out that, again, much like we saw in 2020, is showing that people are not necessarily voting for one of these candidates. Rather, they're voting against one of the candidates.
Well, in that respect, let me give you a point my wife gave me that I stole, and I wrote a pretty well-reviewed piece in the Daily Caller about it. And I'll run it by everyone here now. Again, everyone's focusing on the fact that the youth vote is split 50-50. Of course, if that holds up, Republicans will win everywhere. It'll be a Republican House, Republican Senate, Republican president. We know that. And everybody's focusing on the reasons why. It's not just Joe Biden's age, but how he acts, how he stumbles, how he mumbles and all that, and inflation and the inability to get a mortgage and interest rates and all that. Everybody focuses on the economics with regard to youth. But my Kendall's theory that I've expanded upon is that, and I wrote about, is that this generation of young people, they had a box seat to big government. This is the COVID generation. They had a box seat to big centralized federal decisions that impacted their lives in a negative way, big time. And in fact, most of those decisions were wrong. And in fact, most of those decisions over time were not based on science. And in fact, big government did a lot to cover up their bad decisions and lied to this generation. So it just might be inadvertently during this woke era that big government mistakenly created another Reagan generation of kids who don't trust centralized big government because they've been victimized by it.
Yeah, and some of them have now just had 2 graduations stolen from them. These are the kids who graduated high school when COVID hit, so never graduation there. And then some of these universities, because of what happened with Biden's Middle Eastern policies and his stance on Israel and everything have shut down and canceled their commencements for colleges because they were worried about protesters and violence.
That's true. But again, Kendall's point was even sort of more baseline. The 6 foot distance, the masks, the overselling of the vaccines, the closure of schools, the closure of the gyms, but bars are open. Why? The inconsistencies of these behaviors that impacted their lives, and then they were lied to about it. So again, it's a cynical distrust of government, of federal centralized power, and therein could be the creation of a new generation of Reaganites.
Well, I will use that as an opportunity to plug the Young Republicans as a great organization to get involved in.
Great leader by the Gov here.
This is maybe a great opportunity, Jackie, to suggest that you have a meeting at Masoni's up in Baltimore County
great
for
Italian
the Republicans up there.
Great Italian food, even better company.
Great company at a reasonable price, and then lots of conservatives.
Yes, but it is really interesting. I've said kind of in conversations with my parents, and the very, very bittersweet silver lining to the war in Israel.
By the way, hold on. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Masoni's coffee cup here. So.
Look at that. He was ready. The very, very bittersweet silver lining to this war in Israel is the number of these far left liberal college students who are going to either stay home or, which helps us down ballot, of course, as well, or vote uncommitted, which they've been doing in primaries, or vote third party. And that you have the Reagan-esque young conservatives who are moving over to vote for Trump. And then you have a bunch of far left people who will not vote for who they've deemed Genocide Joe.
Yeah, and because Joe's not left enough. How about that?
Yeah. And I think that could cost him Michigan, some of these higher, because he's tried and failed to ride that line between, Jews have very consistently voted Democrat. Lord knows why. And they are starting to get disenchanted with him because he has flip-flopped on his stance with Israel. And the Democrat, far, far lefties are disenchanted with him because he didn't immediately call for a ceasefire and is still sending weapons to Israel.
And but it also leads into one of Trump's best points that he makes is we don't need to be at this point. Maximum pressure had the government worried about their own survival, not funding their proxies in the Middle East, causing all sorts of mischief. And the president's, in retrospect, and I hope young people get this, hope middle-aged people hope older people get this. President Trump's policy with respect to the Middle East was spot on repeatedly. That kind of got lost in the fog last time in that campaign. But if foreign policy is going to be a major issue in this campaign, which it will be, the comparison is to the benefit of the Trump campaign, no doubt.
Yeah, not a single new war under Trump, and the closest thing we had to peace in the Middle East. But back to, I want to touch on the uncommitted thing for a second, because I have the number pulled up in front of me. 47,358, so that's 10.4% of Democrat voters voted uncommitted last night for president.
Hold on, I looked at that. Yeah.
So that movement, do you think that this is more of a primary only statement, like, hey, we're mad at you, grr, but they're going to suck it up and vote for him in November? Or do you think that they're actually going to follow through with that?
I think most will vote for him in November. Quite frankly, I mean, especially in a blue state, a really liberal state like Maryland, you have a lot of lefties voting in Democratic primaries, and they're pretty hard left.
And do you think the lack of enthusiasm that people have just
that's a point well taken. Not only that translates into another element, which is lack of check writing. So yes, I do think that's playing here. It's very hard to get excited about Joe Biden. It's very hard to get excited about this record. What are you going to say? Yeah. What are you going to say?
There's nothing good.
These foreign policy successes. So I think that point's very well taken.
So do you think that we're going to see a lower turnout than we saw in 2020?
I think they're going to really push for Russell Brooks. I think that's going to help their turnout.
Mark, you had your...
I think we will see across the board a lower turnout, and that's going to be one of the one of the challenges of this election is to kind of, because let's back up. We saw a huge spike between 2016 and 2020 of turnout of voters across the board. And obviously, as we talked about, a very polarizing election. We have on the Republican side, we had Nikki Haley getting 20% higher in areas like Montgomery County. And it's interesting. I follow a little bit of West Virginia, these things. You saw in West Virginia, the Biden vote, the uncommitted vote for Biden was higher than it was in Maryland. It was, I think, closer to 20%. So both parties have some challenges of bringing back.
Well, Mark, I would though point out that in West Virginia, you have a lot of honest to goodness conservative Democrats left.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
Unlike Maryland.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think your point's well taken, but again, I hate to be negative Nelly here, but Joe Biden didn't exactly set the world on fire. Last time he couldn't get 100 people in a backyard. It goes to the cliche, which has become true, which we have to fight now. Republicans run campaigns, Democrats run elections. And you can have 100,000 people in New Jersey for President Trump. That was impressive. That was incredible. That was insane. Well, guess what? Are 100 Democrats showing up in Joe Biden's basement or his backyard? Are they out there bundling and doing their thing and collecting? Yeah. So let's not get confused here between campaigns and elections. Democrats do elections better.
Yeah.
They've proven it. So let's not get all cocky here.
Right. He needs to get all 100,000 of those people to go out and knock doors.
Yeah, exactly. Well put. Exactly.
But we do see a number of their states, sort of the swing states. We realize, of course, that this is an election that's settled in the Electoral College. It very clearly there's some additional states. There's states that Trump lost last time that he's leading now, and there are also some states that I think in particular, for example, of Minnesota, that are in play that had not been carried by Republicans in either. Well, certainly not in 20, but in 16 as well. Which is a roundabout way of coming back to New Jersey. And is it possible that New Jersey is in play?
No, Mark, I would add Virginia to that list. I mean, and I know for a fact those three states, those blue leaning states, are on the radar on our side. And and it's not just positive thinking or wishing so. It's polls in those states reflecting the president within the margin of error in those three blue states. And you talk about crossing a line. You're talking about going from a close election to a not so close election. Have President Trump win even one of those three states. So again, even that, the other side of that coin is, even if he ends up losing those states close, it'll force the Democrats to spend a ton of money, a ton of effort, and so it's all to the good. When you're close in states that you shouldn't be close in, or you haven't been close in recently, and you truly are, it's all to the good.
So you mentioned that you don't think the debates are going to make much of a difference. And I do agree with you. I mean, we're in a very rare situation where people have experienced 4 years of both of these people's presidency. They know exactly what they're getting from each of them. However, do you think, because I've been reading this list of the demands that the Biden administration has come out with, the no audience, cut off the mics, which I don't disagree with the cutting off the mics thing. I would think that they don't want an audience because they don't want anyone seeing him stumbling up onto the stage. Do you think they're going to drug him up? Do you think? How do you anticipate these are going to play out? They're
going to do what they do at State of the Union, whatever they do, and they're going to do everything they can. But again, as long as the president doesn't screw it up, and I submit he screwed it up the first time last time, not the second time, the first time last time, and he talked over Joe Biden and upset a lot of people in that process. Let Joe Biden speak.
The more you let him hang himself with his own rope, the better he is.
Well, at this time especially, you can't. We talked about the issues here. There is no other side to these failures. And the president, which he's capable of doing, we've seen him do it, just sit there calmly and say, Joe, here's what went down. Here's what you did. Here's 2 million gotaways. Here's the fentanyl crisis. Here's American workers. put behind the 8 ball. I mean, here's local mayors not knowing what to do because you decided you wanted an open border. Here's what you said when you invited the world to our border. I mean, it's a pretty easy task. President can clearly do it, President Trump. And keeping Biden's going to be insulting and do what he does. He's going to be shouting as he tends to do these days. And he's going, just don't take the bait. Don't take the bait.
Yeah.
Could I suggest that it struck me as a very smart strategic move on the part of the Biden campaign to push for earlier debates. So the idea is that the traction it has over, obviously there's a cycle that goes on and up and down over a period of months, that we end up, even if they're fall debates, there's debate fatigue and it has less of an impact.
Mark, I'm not buying, I'm throwing the flag on you a little bit maybe on that.
Fair enough. Because
I think the other side of that is they see these polls and they got very few options. And this might have been their only option. Secondly, or the powers that be in the Democratic Party said, you're gone. We're going to take you out in the convention, and you have to do something before that convention to prove to us you can beat this guy, because right now you're getting smacked.
I didn't even think about that first debate is going to be before the convention.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's not even on the ballot in Ohio right now.
In fact, that's the first thing I thought of, thinking, well, why is it June? Oh, I know. Because if there's a move to get rid of him,
if he can't perform, he's done.
Exactly.
That's an interesting point. Now, widely speaking on these debates, these are not being held by the Commission on Debates, who's historically held this. Do you think that that's interpretation of what can be seen in the future, that presidential candidates moving forward and be like, we don't like you anymore?
I hate debates other than one format. They're all phony. They're all 30-second rehearsed hit jobs. The only debate I've ever was it Cheney Lieberman had the best debate I've ever seen. It was just two pretty smart guys sitting there with either no moderator or hardly any moderator and just talking about politics and issues. Oh. And that's, people will watch that. You have 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there. I hated that myself. I loved sort of open debates where you just make your points.
Otherwise, it's not really a debate.
It's not a debate. It's memorizing hit lines.
Yeah,
and that's not talent, and that's not a record. Where you sit there and you just may have no moderator. That's my idea of the best debate. Just the border, go.
Yeah, go. It'll be interesting to see Biden off teleprompter. But I would say that seems very indicative of what we have you on the show. Mark will ask you one question, say go, and then you and Governor Allen just go off.
Well, yeah, we're kind of it's
good. It's good.
I think the people just enjoy that. Maybe it's my prejudice, because I was never very good at 30-second, 20-second, 10-second thing. But give me time to engage, and I'll take that every time.
Yeah, I think nowadays people just wouldn't take a breath long enough for the other person to get a word in edgewise.
Well, and you know what? As you saw last time, that hurt President Trump.
Yeah,
in that first debate, that hurt him.
So,
women particularly.
2 minutes to go. Closing thoughts, final predictions going into this general cycle.
I think if I'm in the Trump camp, I'm cautiously optimistic. I still got ways to go, but Joe Biden's record fails daily. And as the challenger in this time, that's helpful to him. And as a function of contrast as well, it's helpful to him. I think the Senate goes Republican 51-52. And the House, I have no prediction. It's very close. And we have not exactly covered ourselves in glory there in any event.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Let me ask you, how is your book doing?
I didn't even have to prompt you on that one. It's just the actual big news, and this.
I was actually when I was looking around for my copy of it. So you've got it to hand out. Good.
8 million copies here. So the bottom line is, and you, Mark, this, I appreciate the prompting. This book's gone so well and is in such demand out there that it looks like we're going to do a second edition with additional supplemental material. In other words, new chapters with regard to reasons to vote against Joe Biden. So Very happy with it. I'll be running around Florida, Pennsylvania, especially Pennsylvania, Maryland, other states in the next 4 to 6 months, trying to spread the word.
Awesome.
And I love the title, Weak, Wobbly, and
Weak, woke, and wobbly.
Weak, woke, and wobbly.
That one 5 times fast.
Well, they're certainly appropriate terms to describe these 4 years.
Definitely. All right. Well, Governor, as usual, thank you so much for joining us. And Mark, thank you for co-hosting with me.
Enjoyed it, guys.
All right. Have a good one, everybody. We'll be back next week.